When I was 22, so what seems like a lifetime ago now, I landed myself a security job at a steel plant here in Pennsylvania. It was a pretty easy gig for the most part, but there were a lot of overnight shifts, and depending on who you were working with, those shifts could either suck or be a whole lot of fun. I've been working there for about a year with the same team the whole time when, one day, one of the senior guys announced that he was throwing in the towel. He was moving someplace else to be closer to his family, so naturally, the boss needed to replace him. We all hoped the replacement would be a good guy and a decent worker, but what we got was a guy named Parker. A decent worker who seemed to have all the personality traits of a serial killer. We first met Parker on day shifts because you had to complete your probation period before you were allowed to work nights. He was about 6 feet tall with dark eyes, close-cropped dark hair, and a rough beard. He also had a weird scar on the right side of his neck, like where a patch of skin was paler, pinker, and shinier than the rest. Then, whenever he took his gloves off, you could see that he had the same patches of deep pink scar tissue on the outside of his fingers, like near his knuckles. We figured that he'd been in some kind of accident, like a bad car wreck or something, but since it's not polite to bring that kind of stuff up, no one ever asked him. But then it wasn't Parker's scars that freaked us out. It was the way he acted. He was quiet, real quiet, and whenever he did speak, it was like English was a second language to him. He had a distinct northeastern Pennsylvania accent, and by that I mean like Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and the Poconos, that kind of area. But then when he spoke, it was like he was fretting over every little syllable. He'd talk like this, as if stressing over every little word. He'd get real jumpy sometimes too, like a skittish horse. He wouldn't scream and dive under the table anytime he heard a loud noise, and we guarded a steel plant, so in the daytimes there were many, but you could see him suddenly flinch or spin his head around anytime something took him by surprise. The guy seemed like a total ball of nerves, and the fellas even joked that he might kill a man if he snuck up on him and spooked him bad enough. But then at the same time, he was a good worker, so while we remained fairly cautious, we eventually accepted him as one of us. About 6 months into Parker working with us, I found out that I'd be working with him for a whole week's worth of night shifts. Just me, him, and a supervisor. Needless to say, I was not looking forward to that. Our super would be in the security office watching cameras and stuffing his face with little pies, but it'd be up to me and Parker to patrol the grounds of the plant on foot. And like I said before, if you were with the right crew, nights could be a doozy. You'd walk around talking about the birds or the flyers, just shooting the breeze and all of that. And then with Parker, I got the feeling that the conversation wasn't exactly going to flow, and the idea of walking around at night with that buttoned-down psycho felt more of a risk than chasing junkies off the site. All in all, it came down to 2 options: work the shifts or lose out on pay, and so I worked them. I wish I could say working those nights with Parker was like a buddy cop movie or something of that nature, that we slowly warmed up to one another, and we've been pals ever since. But that was not the case. Whenever Parker was sitting in total silence, staring off into space like he was watching a movie no one else could see, he'd be muttering to himself. He'd mostly only do it when he thought no one was around, but I caught him doing it once or twice, and when I did, he sounded like he was real angry about something. And that's what got us all thinking he really was some kind of ticking time bomb. The kind of guy to just snap one day and go totally postal. Naturally, no one wanted to be around him when he did, and when I said that I tried to cozy up to him a little so that he might just skip over shooting me when he finally did bring a gun to work, I'm really only half joking with you. The second night shift we worked together, we were walking around the plant's perimeter fence when I decided to ask Parker what he did before security. And he didn't tell me much, but he did mention having worked for a company that didn't have his back after he got hurt, so he moved on, and that's how he ended up working security. I told him he should just lawyer up and that he could probably win millions if it was some kind of industrial accident, but he told me it wasn't like that, and that the best thing he could have done is just move on. Whatever it was, from the way Parker talked about it, it sounded bad, And with me not being a total jerk, I asked him nothing more about it and changed the subject as quickly as I could. Parker didn't follow any sports, he wasn't into movies like me and some of the other guys there, and he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, and he didn't have any wife or kids or girlfriend. And it got to the point where I asked him, well, what the hell do you do when you're not at work? And he told me he either worked out, worked on his car, or read books. I asked him what kind of books he read, and he started talking about a bunch of old Russian guys whose names I can't even pretend to remember or spell. I've never been much of a reader, and the last thing I read was Huck Finn back in high school, but Parker didn't strike me as much of a reader either, so to hear him talking all fancy like that, it was kind of surprising. He finally managed to find a topic of mutual interests in automobiles, and after Parker told me that he had a 2006 Pontiac GTO, that was all we talked about for the rest of the shift. It was the most conversation any of us had ever had with him, and to me, it was a sign he wasn't going to show up in a hockey mask one day and start chopping us all up with a machete. That's what I told my supervisor too when he asked how working with Parker had been come the end of the shift. I relayed everything I'd been told about Parker getting hurt at the previous job and how in spite of him not giving me much detail, I felt I had a rough idea of what had happened. I said I had no doubt whatsoever that Parker had a messed up past, but that I figured that he was way more of a threat to his former associates than he was to us. And it turns out I was right about that in ways that I could never imagine. On the fourth of what was supposed to be 5 night shifts together, Parker and I stopped by the guard shack by the main entrance for some coffee. It must have been around 1:30 in the morning. It had been a real quiet night, and I planned on working my way through a bag of those mini powdered donuts before we got back on our feet again. I was sitting at the little desk where we kept the logbook, reading through a copy of the previous day's papers someone had left behind while Parker was standing by the shack's window, staring out into the darkness and muttering to himself. 48 hours before, I'd have found that kind of behavior creepy, but it's amazing how quickly you get used to a person's quirks after working a couple of 12-hour night shifts with them. He could stare off into space, mutter to himself a little, and I didn't think it was normal by any stretch, but it didn't freak me out as much as it did when I first met him. But what did freak me out was when out of nowhere, Parker told me, "There's something coming up the road." We never got anyone coming up that road at night, not unless it was someone from security, but they always called ahead. But what was even stranger was when I looked up and saw absolutely nothing on the road outside the shack. Now, keeping in mind that I'm looking for headlights, so when I don't see any, I'm assuming that there's nothing. I also kind of assumed that, I don't know, Parker was just being a little overzealous on account of how jumpy he always was. It wouldn't be the first time that he acted like that and made a mountain out of a molehill, but the boss liked it and said that we should all act a little bit more like that. And so I look up, see nothing, and I respond, "Are you sure, buddy? Because I don't see nothing out there." Parker then says something in response. "They got headlights switched off, but there's something there, all right." And then no sooner had he said that, when the headlights of what looked like a truck or a van switched on so bright that it was almost blinding. I was halfway through yelling out something just like, "Who the hell are those guys?" when Parker turned, and with this real angry look on his face, he comes lunging across the shack at me. I backed up, asking what the hell he was thinking, but he didn't stop. He ran, lowered his body like some football player about to tackle me, and wham! He took me down so hard it knocked the wind out of me, and even though I was fighting for my life, I didn't stand a chance of overpowering him. I had flashes of thoughts running through my mind, stuff about an inside job, about how Parker was a plant and that he was about to kill me to keep me quiet. Hell knows what heist a team would want from a steel plant, but I guess I wasn't thinking straight at the time. This also took place over the space of a couple of seconds, too. Like the lights came on, Parker turned and tackled me. Then, I'm right about to yell, "What are you doing?" when the whole goddamn shack exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. I could hear automatic weapons, maybe half a dozen of them, all slinging lead at the shack, this sort of daka 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 daka. The glass came in first, but after that, You could hear ricochets and see sparks before a bullet hit the light above our heads and plunged the shack into darkness before showering us with even more broken glass. Parker is on top of me the whole time, but obviously by then I realized why he'd taken me to the ground, and I'd quit trying to struggle. He didn't want to hurt me, very much the opposite in fact. The guy I once thought might end up going postal on us was trying to save my life. The gunfire was over in a couple of seconds, and I know it's a huge cliche at this point, but it did feel like way longer. But then the second it went quiet, Parker rolled off of me and then scurried out of the shack at a bit of a crouching position. I wanted to follow him, and I wanted to get up and run, but my legs just wouldn't let me. All I could think about was whatever automatic weapons they had outside, and how if I stood up, they'd put so much lead in me that you could shave my head and use me as a pencil. I wasn't certified to carry a weapon yet, but Parker had shown up certified, which I guess is half the reason he got the job. So while I was armed with nothing but my flashlight and some pepper spray, he'd gone running off carrying our only weapon. I knew whatever brief window I had to escape the shack was gone. Parker had seemed to recognize that the guys outside were reloading and had ducked out of the shack before they had a chance to open fire again. I figured that meant that I had seconds before another hellstorm of bullets ripped through the shack and potentially me too, but then get up and run, and I'd give them something solid to aim at and I'd be totally screwed, not just partially. And so I waited, and waited, half expecting that sound to return again of gunfire and for my lights to go out, but they didn't, and the only thing I heard was the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer to the shack. And like I said before, I had nothing but my pepper spray, but I knew that I had to do something, or whoever was out there was going to walk inside and finish me off. And so I did the only thing I could think to do and start making a lot of noise. I started yelling about how if they took one step closer, I was going to open up with my shotgun, and how even though I wouldn't be able to take all of them out, at least one of them was going to die. The footsteps suddenly stopped, and there was a moment of silence, and then I heard a voice. It sounded like a man who smoked exhaust pipes and ate gravel for breakfast, and when he spoke, he didn't sound mad or scared. He sounded almost smug, asking, "Where's McCabe?" To which I obviously responded, "Who's McCabe?" We didn't have anyone by that name working for us, so you can bet your ass I let them know that lickety-split. And I told them there was no McCabe there, and that's who they were looking for. They'd risked 100 years in prison for absolutely nothing, because whoever that was not here. There was another pause, and then the guy said something like, "I know he's there. I respect you trying to protect him, but it's going to get you killed. And a piece of shit like that isn't worth dying over." I had to tell him a second time that I had exactly zero clue what he was talking about, and that no one had to die because they made a dumb mistake. There was another pause, and I heard the dudes outside sort of whispering to one another, but I couldn't make it out. Then the other guy who smoked exhaust pipes said, "All right, you got to count of 3 to tell us where McCabe is, then we're coming in to kill you." And after that, he started his countdown. After 3, I told him that there was no point in killing me, and all he said in response was, 2. And at that, I started thinking that maybe I could dive out of the broken window as they started approaching, and then I could use the shack as cover for a few seconds to run off into the night. The guy shouted 1, and I was thinking, okay, I need to clear this window in one try or I'm dead. And then the guy shouted, "All right, we're..." And that's all I heard, because whatever his next word, it was drowned up by the sound of more gunfire. I heard maybe 9 or 10 shots, and then someone screamed before some fired again. I was so scared I thought that they were just shooting up the shack again, and instead of actually risking safety to get inside the shack to kill me, they were just going to empty their bullets into it again in the hopes that a shot went through and hit me. But then I very quickly realized nothing was hitting the shack. All the shooting was directed at something else outside. I knew that was my golden opportunity to run, but when it came to standing up again, I knew it was just too much of a risk while there were bullets in the air. I had to stay put, wait for the shooting to stop, and then wait for a moment. But literally no sooner than the shooting did stop, I heard footsteps sprinting over to the shack before suddenly, Parker was standing in front of me, pistol in hand, and this absolute psycho kind of look on his face. He barks at me, "Get out of here! There'll be more of them coming!" I don't know what it was about him telling me all of that, but all of a sudden, my legs suddenly remembered how to work again. I didn't thank him. I didn't ask any questions. I just ran full speed towards the plant's security office to take shelter there. There was a chance our super had seen what was happening, but there was also a chance that he hadn't either, so I needed to get there ASAP to make sure the cops got there ASAP too. And now, long story short, we watched the cameras the whole time till the cops do show up, but all we see is the shack all shot up and the headlights of whatever vehicle the shooters had approached in. Parker, or McCabe, whatever you want to call him, was nowhere to be found, nor to my knowledge did he ever resurface. Our boss handed over all his paperwork to the cops, every last scrap that we had to go on, and they came back and told us all of it was false. The only thing that was real was Parker's face, and that it did match a guy named McCabe's who used to be part of some prison gang until his relationship with his associates soured for some reason. And that's all the explanation we ever got, and as far as I know, Parker, or McCabe, is still on the run. I don't know what he did to piss those guys off so much, but I know they made a mistake coming after him like that. A mistake they paid for with their lives. My name is Father Thomas, and I've been with the parish priesthood at St. Nicholas's Catholic Church here in Winchcombe for the past 3.5 years. Winchcombe is a small town here in rural Gloucestershire, and about 5,000 people are very proud to call it home. It's about as quaint a rural English town as you're ever likely to find, with a beautiful village green, a trio of timelessly charming pubs, and even a 15th century Tudor castle on the town's outskirts. There's nowhere on earth I'd rather be living or serving God. But it's also true that Winchcombe has a history steeped in strange and sometimes rather sinister occurrences. Visit the local museum and you'll be told that Winchcombe started life as a Roman hamlet around the middle of the 1st century, but about 3 miles to the southeast, atop a place called Cleve Hill, you'll find traces of a Neolithic burial ground that dates back 5,000 years. The area's inhabitants would take their dead to a chambered long barrow atop the hill, which was not only a place of reverence, but also a place of rite and ritual where the living could commune with the dead. There was a focus on collective memory and kinship, emphasizing the dead as part of a community rather than isolated individuals, and befitting my profession, that's something I find profoundly moving. Yet I've often wondered how much influence those ancestral spirits have today, or if the strange events I've observed around Winchcombe are the echoes of much more recent events. In the 16th century, scandal rocked a nearby monastery known as Hales Abbey. For hundreds of years, the monastery had been home to a religious relic known as the Holy Blood, which consisted of an ornately decorated wooden box containing a glass vial of Jesus Christ's blood. Supposedly, the vial had filled with the blood which dripped from Christ's feet during his crucifixion and had been delivered from the Holy Land by a crusading knight sometime in the 13th century. The knight claimed the relic had been given to him by the monks of a hermitage somewhere near the Dead Sea after defending its occupants against a Saracen raid. The monks guaranteed their very souls on the relic's authenticity, claiming it had once belonged to one of Christ's apostles. Following its interment in Hales Abbey, the monastery became one of the most prominent in all of England. But sometime in the 16th century, an inspection of the Holy Blood uncovered something deeply shocking. The vial containing Christ's blood had been stolen. Following an investigation, the official story became that the Holy Blood had been stolen by a group of professional thieves at the behest of a wealthy benefactor. However, if someone was rich enough to finance the theft of such a relic, you can bet that they had a large house with a large staff. A staff which, if they believed the blood of Christ was secreted somewhere in their home, would have had a very hard time keeping their mouths shut about it. Yet as history shows, neither the thieves nor the buyer were ever found. Many believe the holy blood would still be intact, hidden away somewhere until its inevitable discovery. Others have a much more disconcerting explanation. Shortly after the theft of the holy blood, a royally sanctioned witch finder arrived in Gloucestershire. The King of England, James I, was obsessed with stamping out witchcraft and other heresy, and so when he heard the holy blood had been stolen, he believed devilry was afoot and sent his chief witch-finder to root it out. The witch-finder's investigation led to the Burley witch trials, whereby Joan Flower and her two daughters, Margaret and Philippa, were accused of cursing the Earl of Rutland. After half a dozen of the Earl's family and friends suffered sudden and tragic deaths, many blamed a hidden coven of witches. Margaret and Philippa Flower were hunted down, arrested, then hanged following convictions for communing with the devil. Their mother, heartbroken and impoverished, died in prison not long after. A few years later, a woman named Alice Colerne was accused of causing illness and death by using curses and charms. She was convicted following testimonies from her own neighbors and was executed to the cheers of the gathered townsfolk. It's clear that, at the time, many believed that the holy blood had been stolen by the accused and used in a series of profane rituals. They believed these rituals had brought a great and terrible darkness to the region, and it seems there are some who still believe this, even hundreds of years later. I've seen some rather unsettling graffiti around town over the years, things quite unlike the usual dross teenagers like to daub, but those will not be the focus of this memoir. What I've told you are things I wished I knew before I arrived in Witchcombe, and because at the very least I feel like they have helped me understand some of the things that have happened here since. For although I now live a life of peace, harmony, and simplicity, I had to endure a living nightmare to obtain it. I won't stultify you with the finer details of entering the priesthood, but let's just say it's neither quick, nor easy, nor painless. For some prospective priests, it takes years of discernment before they commit themselves. Then after that, you're looking at a decade of training until you're even considered for priesthood. Then, when you finally do become a priest, you have to serve under another much more experienced counterpart before either taking over the parish or being assigned one of your own. That's the exact position I was in when I arrived in Winchcombe back in early 2020. St. Nicholas's Church was under the care of Father Michael, an elderly priest who'd held the position since the mid-1970s. He was set to retire in the summer of 2021, so the idea was I'd spend 18 months under his tutelage before taking over as guardian of the church and parish. The usual period of tutelage is 2 years, so as you can imagine, I was rather surprised at the offer of a rare shortcut. Needless to say, it came with a caveat. Father Michael, who was almost 79 years old when we first met, had been in a state of mental decline for quite some time, and his condition had become of deep concern to many of his parishioners. People spoke of strange sermons, troubling outbursts, or unsettling remarks during cloistered conversations, and to our boss, the Bishop of Clifton, this was unacceptable. If I could keep Father Michael's behavior under wraps and prevent the situation from progressing into a full-blown scandal, then one of the most coveted parishes in England would be mine for as long as I could serve it. I knew it'd be a challenge. I was taking on the role of a carer as well as a priest, but at the same time, it was an absolute no-brainer, as they say. I considered it an honor to be able to tend to a veteran of the church during the twilight of his tenure. I just didn't realize how terribly taxing it would prove to be, both to my faith and to my sanity. I first visited Winchcombe in December of 2019, prior to my confirmation there. Father Michael had something of the final say on who he'd transfer the parish to. But after some afternoon tea and a long conversation on ecumenical matters, the man himself told me that I'd gotten the job. Father Michael wasn't anything like I'd imagined him, and in so many words, I'd been told that he was losing his mind and was a liability to the church, but our meeting suggested nothing of the sort. Father Michael was aged, but his mind was as sharp as his wit, and as I said, we spoke at length on a number of different topics, all of which he displayed a vast knowledge of. He was assertive but welcoming, charming but humble, and displayed wisdom without arrogance. He embodied everything I thought a priest was supposed to, so quirks or no quirks, I was thrilled at the prospect of being mentored by him, even if that mentorship came with its unique set of challenges. In early February of 2020, I moved into the spare room of the cottage that stands behind St. Nicholas's Church. It's a beautiful little cottage with a thatched roof and a small rose garden. It's also my current home and the place that I presently sit and type this memoir. But back when I first arrived, it was a place of great uncertainty for me. But now, almost 5 years to the day since I moved into that cottage, I have more unanswered questions than ever. My first month or so under Father Michael's tutelage went smoothly. I helped him perform Mass, I helped him perform baptisms, and we went through procedures for both weddings and funerals. I accompanied Father Michael on visits to hospitals and nursing homes, and I sat in on pastoral counseling sessions to learn how to provide guidance and support to my future parishioners. I shadowed Father Michael in preparing sermons and homilies, and then when it came to my own personal duties, I would organize Bible study groups or youth group meetings. I also had to manage the daily administrative duties of the church, which kept me very busy, I can assure you. But that first month, aided by the warmth of the Christmas season, made for a very smooth transition into my new life. There were no signs of...
The hum of the car engine was the only sound that kept me company as I navigated the quiet streets. Being an Uber driver on the night shift wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Tonight was particularly exhausting, and the hunger gnawed at my stomach. I decided to make a quick stop at a convenience store for a snack. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly as I scanned the shelves. I grabbed a snack and a drink, ready to get back onto the road. That's when I noticed him, a man standing by the counter, taking a quick glance at me. His eyes were cold and calculating, and I could sense something was off. But then I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just tired. I paid for my items and headed back to my car. As I walked through the parking lot, that eerie feeling of being watched lingered. Glancing back, I saw the man still standing there, watching me through the store's glass door. My heartbeat quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. There's no need to freak out over some stranger, right? We see a lot out there. I took a deep breath and started the engine. The night was quiet again, and I tried to focus on my next fare. Soon enough, a ride request came in. I hesitated when I saw the pickup location. It was in a remote area, far from the city's main roads. I sighed, knowing this would likely be my last fare for the night. With a resigned nod, I accepted the ride. The drive through the remote area felt endless. The night was growing darker, and the isolation was starting to get to me. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the creepy unease. Finally, I reached the pickup point, a desolate stretch of road surrounded by dense trees. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I parked my car and glanced around, searching for any sign of my passenger. The minutes ticked by, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Just as I was about to cancel the ride and get out of there, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a young woman, her face pale and tired, mirroring how I felt inside. She approached the car slowly, almost cautiously. "Are you Sarah?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unlocking the doors. She climbed into the back seat and let out a weary sigh. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, noting the exhaustion etched into her features. Without another word, I started the car and headed back to the main roads, eager to finish this ride and put the night behind me. After dropping off my passenger, I felt a small sense of relief. The roads were quieter now, and I started to relax. As I made my way back towards the city, I noticed a car parked a short distance away with its lights off. It seemed out of place, but I didn't give it much thought. A few minutes later, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights. The same car was now following me, its lights glaring through the darkness. My heart began to race. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. As I continued driving, the car stayed close, its presence becoming impossible to ignore. The high beams flicked on, and the bright light filled my car, making it hard to see the road ahead. My anxiety spiked, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The car behind me swerved slightly, as if trying to get my attention. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the same man from the convenience store. My thoughts raced, and I realized I needed to find a way to get out of this situation. The car's aggressive maneuvers became more intense. It swerved closer, almost clipping my bumper. Panic set in as I realized this wasn't a coincidence. The man from the store was pursuing me, and his intentions were far from benign. My mind raced, searching for an escape plan. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, hoping to outrun him, but the car stayed right on my tail. My hands shook as I tried to dial 911, but my phone had no signal in this remote area. The realization that I was completely alone hit me hard. I was on my own. The car behind me started to ram into my bumper, jolting me forward. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to maintain control of the vehicle. I took a sharp turn onto a narrow, winding road, hoping to lose him, but he followed effortlessly. The headlights filled my rearview mirror, blinding me. My fear deepened. I had to keep moving. The car behind me revved its engine, and I could see the driver's silhouette. It was him, the man from the convenience store, his face twisted with malicious intent. Desperation took over. I swerved onto a dirt road, kicking up dust and gravel. My car bounced violently over the uneven terrain, but I couldn't afford to slow down. The pursuer's car was relentless, its high beams cutting through the darkness like knives. I prayed for a miracle, for something to save me from this nightmare. With no other option, I decided to head towards the nearest town, hoping to find help. I just needed to stay ahead, to keep driving and not let him catch me. I had to think fast. My only chance was to lose him on the back roads, where the twists and turns might give me an edge. I took another sharp turn, the tires screeching against the asphalt. My car lurched as I navigated the narrow lanes, the darkness making it difficult to see. I glanced in the mirror and saw the car still there, unwavering in its pursuit. My heart pounded, and my hands were slick with sweat. Up ahead, I spotted a fork in the road. Without hesitation, I veered left, hoping the sudden change would throw him off. For a moment, it seemed to work. The headlights disappeared, and a flicker of hope ignited within me. But my relief was short-lived. The lights reappeared, closer than before. My fear escalated. I pushed the car to its limits, the engine roaring as I raced against time. The landscape blurred past me, a mix of shadows and faint outlines of trees. The road was getting rougher, and I felt every bump and pothole jarring my bones. In a final bid for safety, I headed towards a more populated area, hoping the presence of the other people would deter him. I sped through the quiet streets, my eyes scanning for any signs of life. The car behind me showed no signs of stopping. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A gas station with lights on. My last hope. I swerved into the parking lot, screeching to a halt. I jumped out, running towards the entrance. I glanced back and saw the car slowing down, but not stopping. The man stayed inside, watching me with those cold, calculating eyes. I banged on the door, praying someone would answer. I needed help, and I needed it now. As I banged on the gas station door, the weight of my situation hit me. The man from the convenience store had been following me all along. Panic turned to determination. I couldn't rely on anyone else. I had to confront this threat head-on. I grabbed a tire iron from my trunk, my hands trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The car was now parked at the gas station entrance, its engine idling. The man's silhouette was visible through the windshield, his eyes fixed on me with a chilling intensity. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped forward. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the still night. The man didn't respond, but the sinister look on his face said it all. He was toying with me, enjoying the fear he was causing. He got out of the car, moving slowly towards me. I tightened my grip on the tire iron, ready to defend myself. The distance between us closed, and I could see the malicious intent in his eyes. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stood my ground, refusing to be a victim. The moment of confrontation had arrived. The man advanced, and I could see the malevolence in his eyes. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood my ground, clutching the tire iron tightly. He lunged at me, and I swung the tire iron with all my might, striking his arm. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. Seizing the opportunity, I ran towards my car. The adrenaline surged through my veins, propelling me forward. Just as I reached the car door, he recovered and charged again. I turned and struck him again, this time hitting his leg. He fell to the ground, writhing in pain. My hands shook, but I couldn't let up. I needed to escape. I jumped into my car and locked the doors. The man struggled to get up, his eyes burning with rage. I started the engine and floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched as I sped out of the gas station, leaving him behind. In my rear-view mirror, I saw him stumbling to his feet, but I didn't look back. My focus was on getting to safety, to the nearest police station. I had survived the encounter, but the fear lingered, driving me to find help as quickly as possible. With my heart still pounding, I drove straight to the nearest police station. The bright lights were a beacon of safety in the dark night. I stumbled out of the car and rushed inside, breathless and terrified. I told the officers everything about the man, the chase, and the confrontation. They listened intently and assured me they would handle it. Sitting in the station, surrounded by safety, I finally felt the tension begin to ease. The ordeal had shaken me to my core, but I knew I was safe now. It was a late, lonely night, and I was driving home after a grueling day at work. The road ahead seemed never-ending, and I was exhausted, my eyes heavy and my blinks getting longer. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, but it felt like I was the only person left in the world. Out of habit, I reached for the radio dial. The usual static greeted me, but tonight it felt different. I twisted the knob, trying to find a station, but all I got was more static. A weird, uneasy feeling started to creep in, like a cold fog filling the car. My fingers hovered over the dial and the static began to change. It sounded more sinister, almost like a whisper. I leaned in closer, trying to make it out, and then I heard it. A voice, faint, but definitely there, hidden in the white noise. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I realized it was saying my name. Alex. My heart started pounding. Must be a prank, I muttered, trying to shake off the creepy feeling. But the static didn't stop. The whispers continued, soft and unintelligible, sending chills down my spine. I forced a laugh, trying to ignore the growing fear. After all, radios don't just start talking to you, right? I kept driving, trying to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the whispers. The static on the radio grew louder, almost as if it was alive, trying to get my attention. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, the static faded, and I heard it again. My name, clear as day. I froze, my heart racing. This wasn't a prank. The voice was too real, too insistent. It started to say other things, strange and disturbing things. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Then, the voice predicted an accident. It described it in chilling detail. The location, the time, even the other car involved. I could feel the panic rising inside of me, but I tried to stay calm. This can't be happening, I thought. It's just my imagination running wild. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The voice was too specific, too eerily accurate. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. The time matched what the voice had said. My stomach churned with dread. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it either. I tried to change the station, but the whispers came back, more urgent and insistent. It's like the radio had a mind of its own, refusing to let me go. Desperate to escape the unsettling messages, I focused on getting home, but the dread lingered, heavy and oppressive. As I drove on, trying to ignore the whispers, I felt a growing sense of unease. The road ahead was dark and empty, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the eerie static from the radio. Suddenly, the whispers became clearer, repeating the details of the predicted accident over and over. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, rapidly approaching. My heart raced as the car swerved into my lane, just like the voice had described. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision. My car skidded, tires screeching, before coming to a stop on the shoulder. Breathing heavily, I looked back to see the other car speeding off into the night. The voice on the radio had been right. I sat there for a moment, trying to collect myself, my hands trembling on the wheel. The fear that had been gnawing at me exploded into full-blown panic. This wasn't just a creepy coincidence. Something was seriously wrong. I tried changing the station again, desperate to hear anything else, but the radio refused to cooperate. The whispers continued, more insistent now, almost angry. It felt like the radio was alive, like it knew I had narrowly escaped and wasn't done with me yet. I could feel my sanity slipping, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. Shaking off the near miss, I got back on the road, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. The whispers had stopped, but now the radio was playing something else. Snippets of conversations. At first, they were random, but then I recognized them. They were my conversations, things I had said earlier that day, private things I'd only shared with close friends. It was like the radio was eavesdropping on my life. The unease turned into full-blown paranoia. I felt like I was being watched, like someone or something was in the car with me. The snippets of conversation faded into eerie sounds, children laughing, screams, and unsettling noises that made my skin crawl. I turned the volume down, but the sounds persisted, invading my mind. I checked the back seat, half expecting to see someone there, but it was empty. The car felt colder, and then a shadow seemed to move in the corners of my eyes. My heart was pounding, and every instinct screamed at me to get out of the car, but I was in the middle of nowhere. There was no safe place to go. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the radio acting up, maybe some kind of interference, but it didn't help. The fear was too real. I felt trapped, isolated in my own car, with no escape from the haunting sounds. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The road stretched out endlessly before me, and I knew I had to keep driving, but every mile felt like it was pulling me deeper into a nightmare. I had to get home. I had to escape this terrifying experience, but the fear was suffocating, pressing down on me like a heavy weight. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the radio crackled back to life with a new intensity. The whispers were gone, replaced by a clear, cold voice. It spoke directly to me, giving precise warnings. "Don't take the next turn," it said, and I hesitated, feeling an icy chill run down my spine. I was tempted to ignore it, to prove to myself that it was all in my head, but something stopped me. I listened, and as I passed the turn, I saw the flashing lights of a police barricade in the distance. If I had taken that turn, I would have driven straight into a dangerous situation. The voice had saved me. The warnings continued, each one more urgent and specific than the last. "Slow down, there's ice ahead," it would say, and sure enough, I'd see the glistening patches on the road. "Stay in the right lane," and I'd avoid a sudden obstacle on the left. My fear grew with every instruction, but I couldn't deny their accuracy. The voice knew things I couldn't possibly know. The tension was unbearable. Every moment felt like a test, a challenge to my sanity. I didn't want to trust the voice, but it was keeping me safe. It was as if the radio was possessed, guiding me through the night with supernatural knowledge. My mind raced with questions. Who or what was behind this? And why was it helping me? The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. The radio wasn't just a device anymore, it was a lifeline, a connection to something beyond this world. My heart pounded as I followed each directive, my fear and curiosity intertwined. I had to find out what was happening, but I was too terrified to stop. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear was too much, and I had to make it stop. I reached over and tried to turn off the radio, but the knob wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. I yanked the power cord, pulled out the antenna, even banged on the dashboard, but nothing worked. The radio stayed on, the voice still speaking in eerie warnings. Desperate, I pulled over to the side of the road. I rummaged through the glove compartment looking for anything that might help. My hands were shaking as I found a screwdriver. Maybe I could disconnect the battery, cut off the power completely. I popped the hood and hurried to the front of the car. In the darkness, with only my phone's flashlight to guide me, I fumbled with the battery connections. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. Finally, I managed to disconnect it. The engine died, but the radio kept playing. My blood ran cold. This was beyond anything I could explain. I got back in the car, feeling helpless. The radio had a mind of its own, and I was trapped with it. My only option was to keep driving, hoping that somehow I'd find a way to escape this nightmare. As I drove on, the radio's voice grew more demanding, almost pleading. It wasn't just giving warnings anymore, it was asking for help. I tried to block it out, but it was impossible. The voice was inescapable, like it was echoing inside my head. Then it happened. The radio went silent, and for a moment I felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope was crushed when the silence was replaced by a ghostly presence. The air in the car turned icy cold, and I could see my breath. A shadowy figure appeared in the passenger seat, and I nearly swerved off the road in shock. "Help me," the ghostly voice whispered. My chest tightened with fear. "I need you to right a wrong," the figure pointed ahead, compelling me to follow its direction. The voice revealed the tragic story of betrayal and unfinished business. The spirit had been wronged in life, and its restless soul had latched onto the radio, seeking someone to help it find peace. The details were chilling, and as the ghost spoke, I felt an overwhelming urgency. I approached a small abandoned house on the side of the road. The ghost's story led me here, and I knew I had to stop. I pulled over, my hands trembling as I got out of the car. The ghostly presence followed me, guiding me to the front door. It whispered instructions, urging me to uncover the truth and make things right. The tension was unbearable. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The ghostly figure right behind me. This was it. The moment of confrontation. I had to face the spirit's past and find a way to bring it peace. Inside the abandoned house, the air was thick with a sense of dread. The ghostly figure guided me to an old, dusty desk. On it was a stack of letters, yellowed with age. The ghost whispered, "Read them." With trembling hands, I opened the first letter. It told the story of a man who had been wronged, betrayed by a close friend. The letters revealed the web of deceit and betrayal that had led to his untimely death. The ghost needed closure and justice for the wrongs done to him. As I read the last letter, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the ghostly figure began to fade. "Thank you," it whispered, a sense of peace in its voice. By reading the letters, I had acknowledged the truth and the pain that the spirit had endured. It was this recognition and understanding that allowed the ghost to finally rest. I placed the letters back on the desk, feeling a strange calm wash over me. I walked out of the house, the night air feeling warmer and less oppressive. I got back in the car, and to my relief, the radio was silent. The haunting was over. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something extraordinary. The ghost had found peace, and in a way, so had I. But I knew I'd never forget that night or the voice on the radio. I was on my usual route, a long stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The hum of the engine was almost soothing, a constant companion on my solitary drives. Nights like this were routine. Just me, the open road, and the cargo in the back. I had been a trucker for years, and I had grown accustomed to the long hours and the quiet solitude of the highway. This particular night, fatigue began to set in. The monotonous rhythm of the road was hypnotic, and my eyes grew heavy. I decided it was time to pull over and take a break. I spotted a rest area up ahead, a small clearing by the side of the road that offered a brief respite for weary travelers. I guided the truck off the highway and into the rest area, parking under a canopy of trees. As I turned off the engine, the silence was almost deafening. I stepped out of the cab, stretching my legs and taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The stars were out in full force, their lighting flickering through the branches above. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the constant motion of the highway. I walked around the truck, checking the tires and making sure everything was in order. The stillness of the night was interrupted by the occasional rustle of leaves. Just as I was about to climb back into the cab for a quick nap, I heard it, a scream. It was distant but unmistakable, slicing through the silence like a knife. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The scream came again, more desperate this time. It was coming from the woods nearby. Instinctively, I grabbed my flashlight and my hunting knife from the glove compartment. I started towards the sound, leaving the safety of my truck behind. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow path leading into the trees. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown. The forest was dense and foreboding, the kind of place that seemed to swallow sound and light. I could feel my pulse quicken as I moved deeper into the woods, driven by the urgency of that haunting scream. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The flashlight's beam flickered as it passed over the twisted branches and dense underbrush. My senses were on high alert, every rustle and creak of the forest making my heart race. As I continued, the scream echoed in my mind, urging me to hurry. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a small clearing. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something on the ground. As I approached, my breath caught in my throat. Lying there, partially covered by leaves and dirt, was the body of a woman. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in a final expression of terror. Blood stained the ground around her. Obviously, she had been through hell. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the horror of what I was seeing. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had done this. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I checked for any signs of life. But it was clear she was gone. My mind raced. Who was she? How did she end up here? And more importantly, where was the person responsible? I scanned the surrounding trees, half expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the forest. As I stood up, something caught my eye. A small trail of disturbed leaves and broken branches leading deeper into the woods. It was clear that someone had been dragged through here. My heart sank as I realized there might be someone else in danger. I tightened my grip on the knife and flashlight, determined to find whoever had done this. The trail was faint, but it was enough to follow. With each step, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just about finding the source of the scream anymore. It was about stopping a monster before they could hurt anyone else. The further I went, the more signs of struggle I saw. Broken branches, trampled underbrush, and the occasional drop of blood marked the path. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the woman's terrified eyes haunting me. Finally, I came to another small clearing. In the center, a makeshift camp was set up, with a crude shelter made of branches and leaves, and there, huddled in a corner, was a little girl. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, her face dirty and streaked with blood. My heart broke at the sight. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. As I approached, she flinched, fear evident in every movement. I knelt down, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help," I said softly, extending a hand towards hers. She hesitated, then slowly reached out to take my hand. But just as our fingers touched, her eyes suddenly widened, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. I spun around, barely dodging a sharp blade aimed at my shoulder. The knife grazed me, sending a searing pain through my arm. Standing there was a man, his eyes wild and crazed, with a twisted smile on his face. He was dirty and disheveled, his clothes torn and stained. He looked like he had been living in the woods for weeks, maybe months. His grip tightened around the knife as he lunged at me again, his movements erratic and violent. I dodged, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The girl's scream echoed in my ears, and I knew I had to protect her at all costs. The man slashed wildly, his eyes filled with a terrified madness. He seemed to take pleasure in the fear he was causing, his grin growing wider with each missed strike. I raised my own knife, ready to defend myself. The woods seemed to close in around us, the darkness amplifying the terror of the moment. This was no ordinary fight. It was a battle for survival against a deranged killer. I could barely catch my breath as I squared off against the maniac in front of me. The girl clung to my leg, her sobs muffled against my jeans. I needed to keep her safe and find a way to fend off this lunatic. The man circled us, his eyes gleaming with a twisted glee. He was playing with us, enjoying the fear he was causing. Every step he took, I matched, keeping the girl behind me and the knife ready. My mind raced, looking for any opportunity to get us out of this alive. Then he lunged at me again. I barely managed to deflect his attack. The clash of our knives echoed through the forest, a sharp reminder of the deadly stakes. His movements were erratic, driven by some dark impulse. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, hoping to distract him, even for a moment. He laughed, a chilling sound. "Because it's fun," he replied, his voice dripping with malice. The girl's grip tightened on my leg. I glanced around, looking for anything that could give me an advantage. The forest was dense, but I spotted a heavy branch lying on the ground a few feet away. It wasn't much, but it could work. I made a split-second decision. Feinting to the left, I threw my flashlight at him, aiming for his face. He instinctively raised his arm to block, giving me just enough time to grab the branch. With all my strength, I swung at his head. The branch connected with a sickening thud, and he staggered, momentarily dazed. But he recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. He lunged at me again, and this time I aimed low, slashing at his thigh with my knife. He let out a howl of pain, dropping to one knee. Blood poured from the wound, giving us the moment we needed. "Run!" I yelled to the girl, pushing her ahead of me as I grabbed the flashlight. We rushed through the forest, the beam of light guiding our way. The man's enraged cries faded behind us, but I didn't dare slow down. My heart pounded as we stumbled onto a narrow path. I grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her along as fast as we could go. We needed to reach the truck, our only hope of escaping this nightmare. The adrenaline surged through me, pushing my tired muscles to keep moving. Branches whipped at our faces, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The flashlight flickered, but I kept it steady, illuminating our path. Finally, we broke through the tree line and saw my truck. I fumbled with the keys, adrenaline making my hands shake. We climbed in, and I locked the doors, starting the engine with a sense of urgency. The truck roared to life as we sped off down the highway, the nightmare fading into the distance behind us. "We're safe now," I said, glancing at the girl beside me. Her sobs had quieted, replaced by a look of exhausted relief. "We're going to be okay." The truck roared down the highway, the forest and its horrors fading behind us. The little girl beside me had finally stopped crying, but her face was still streaked with tears and dirt. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I could feel the exhaustion setting in, but I couldn't stop yet. We needed help. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, keeping one eye on the road. Later, the distant wail of sirens eventually reached us, and the flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. I let out a sigh, knowing the nightmare was finally over. We had escaped the horrors of the forest, and the danger was behind us. As I pulled over and waited for the authorities, I thought about all the truckers out there on lonely highways. "Stay alert," I whispered to myself. "You never know what's lurking in the dark."